chapter 9, and to summarize what we've studied until now, the Rebbe described for us the godly soul and the natural soul. The godly soul reflects the divine attributes and therefore has 10 faculties, just as God uses 10 attributes with which to create the world. The soul also has 3 garments, thought, speech, and deed, just as God expresses himself through thought, speech, and deed, such as God said, "Let there be." All of this is all holy and godly in the godly soul. A reflection of all of this exists in the human soul or the animal soul. It too has 10 faculties. It too has 3 garments. Only in the animal soul, it is non-holy, unholy. So there is love in the godly soul. It's a love for God. There's love in the animal soul, but it's a love of self or of things that appeal to self. So nothing in the unholy is original. It is a reflection of that which exists in holiness, but without the holiness itself. So there is love and there is fear and there is compassion in holiness. There is love, fear, compassion, but without the holiness in the human soul. However, the similarities must end because by their very nature, there are some fundamental differences between a godly soul and a human soul or an animal soul. So in chapter 9, the Rebbe says that the dwelling place, the place where the animal soul expresses itself primarily in the body, is in the left side of the heart. In the heart and the left side of the heart. Now, the reason that the animal soul's place is in the heart is because the animal soul is primarily emotional, although it has intellect and emotion. And in fact, the intellect guides and controls the emotion. But in the animal soul, as it is with literal animals, the emotions dominate. And the intellect, the intelligence, is used to harness, to describe, to proscribe, to channel, or to justify the emotions. And so naturally, the place for this soul, for this life force, is in the heart where there is excitement and emotion. The reason that it's in the left side of the heart is because the left side of the heart is full of blood. In other words, the function of the left side of the heart is to gather the blood. The function of the right side of the heart is to oxygenate the blood. So in the left side of the heart, where the blood is dominant, is important, and the blood is where the soul rests, the animal soul, as the expression in the Bible, the blood is the life. The blood is the soul. That's talking about the natural soul, the animal soul within us. There's also the expression, the soul of the flesh. They're both describing the natural soul, not the godly soul. And what they're both saying is that because it is a natural soul, it relates directly to the body and is contained or expressed in the blood. The blood is primarily in the left side of the heart, and that's why the animal soul is experienced in the heart, in the left side of the heart, in the blood. From the left side of the heart, the animal soul, its influence, spreads to the right side of the heart and to all the limbs of the body through the blood. The blood carries the soul to all the limbs of the body, including the brain. It rises from the heart to the brain to influence even our thinking, even our understanding. The godly soul, on the other hand, is in the brain, primarily. The life force of the godly soul expresses itself more in the brain than in the heart. And that's because the godly soul is more distant, is more removed from the flesh, and makes itself comfortable in that part of the body that is also more abstract, more disembodied, rather than embodied. And that's in the brain. Not in the intelligence of the brain, in the life force of the brain. Now from there, the influence of the godly soul spreads throughout the entire body, since the brain controls and influences all activities of the body. The heart influences the entire body by spreading the blood to it. The brain influences the entire body, possibly through the nervous system or whatever way, but it controls all activity of the body. And so the godly soul too, through the function of the brain, influences all of our activities, including also the heart. But in the heart, the godly soul is felt more in the right side of the heart than in the left side of the heart, because the right side of the heart is more about oxygen than about blood. Again, a little bit more abstract, a little less embodied than the blood. Now, the problem is that here we have two souls, each with its own set of faculties and garments, each with its own location in the body. The animal soul is primarily in the heart and the left side. The godly soul is primarily in the brain, and even in the heart, it's in the right side of the heart. Why then is there a problem? In chapter 9, the Rebbe explains the problem. The problem is that each of the souls is like a king. It wants sovereignty. Over what does it want sovereignty? Over the functions of the body. So the body is described as a little city, a miniature city, and the two souls are like two kings engaged in a battle, in a war, over the control of the city. Now, when kings fight over a city, they're fighting for the sovereignty over the city. A king cannot share his kingdom. It's an exclusive kind of thing. So if a king wants a city, he wants complete control of the city. When you have two kings fighting over one city, then you have the demands for sovereignty coming from two directions. Each of the kings can leave no room for the other, because a compromise in sovereignty is totally unacceptable. The godly soul wants complete control of the body. It wants the body to function only in a godly fashion, to respond only to the godly impulses, to surrender only to godly impulses, and to be a vehicle only for godliness. These are three very important things: to be responsive, surrendered, and a vehicle. To be responsive means that you react to the input. For example, if you are responsive to what we're studying here, then you are reacting to what you're hearing. Surrendered means that you make it your business, you make it your goal to live up to the business or to the needs of someone else. So when a king wants a city, he wants it to respond to him. He wants the people of the city to hear him, to understand him, to react to him. He also wants them to surrender to him. That in addition to understanding what the king wants, the people of the city should want the same thing the king wants. Now, I can understand someone's teachings. I don't necessarily want what those teachings imply. So I am responsive, I'm reacting, I'm absorbing, I hear it, I understand it, but I'm not surrendering to it because I have my own agenda. So now we have responsive and surrender. Then there's a third thing. I can surrender to something because it appeals to me, so that when I do it, I'm doing it because I was asked to and because I enjoy it. Being a vehicle, being a chariot for something means I have no agenda of my own. I don't do anything for myself. It's purely devoted to the cause or to the purpose in which I believe. The soul wants exclusive sovereignty to the body, both the godly soul and the animal soul. Now, just from a physical observation, in order for a soul to be in a body in a healthy fashion, the body must react and respond to the soul in one of three ways, or all three. The body has to be responsive to the soul. For example, the soul wants to know something, the brain responds and studies the subject and gets to understand the subject. That's responsive. A brain is responsive, but it does have an agenda of its own. It responds in its own way by understanding, by reasoning, by logic. Then there is the part of the soul that demands surrender. The internal organs, for example, the heart, the kidney, the liver, they all function all the time, but their function is completely surrendered to the soul. The internal organs make no demands. They don't have to do it their way. They do what they're supposed to do willingly, silently, without objection, without demand. Of course, when the brain refuses to respond, there is something wrong. This is an unhealthy person. When the kidneys refuse to surrender, there is something wrong. This is not a healthy person. A kidney, a liver, a heart should be completely surrendered to the impulses of the soul. As soon as you start hearing an agenda from your kidneys, it's not good. Bad news. So we have the responsiveness of the brain to the soul. We have the surrender of the internal organs to the soul. And then you have, for example, the obedience of the foot to the soul. Now this is different from the obedience of the kidney to the soul. The kidney is supposed to be functioning at all times, constantly functioning, doing its job. A foot need not function all the time. In fact, it shouldn't function all the time. It should act only when given instruction by the soul. When the soul wants the foot to move, then it moves. When the soul doesn't want the foot to move, it does nothing, like a chariot, like a vehicle, like a car. It doesn't go anywhere unless you take it there. Not like a horse, which is supposed to be responsive and surrendered, but it's not a vehicle. When you're not riding it, it has its own movements. It does its own thing. When you do ride it, it should be completely responsive to the rider. A chariot is not only responsive to the rider, it's not only surrendered to the rider, it's a vehicle, which means that when the rider is not there, it does nothing of its own. So a foot that has its own activities, or a foot that is functioning all the time, is not healthy. The foot that is constantly in motion, something's wrong. Of course, the foot that will not move when you want it to move is more seriously wrong. But the foot is supposed to be the chariot to the soul. It does nothing on its own and does everything the soul asks it to do. So these three things that a king demands from his subjects is what a soul demands from a body. In order to be healthy, the body has to respond to the king in these three ways: responsive, surrendered, and a vehicle. Now, the godly soul wants this exclusive kind of control over the body because godliness is not compatible with ungodliness. The natural soul, the human soul, also wants sovereignty over the body. It wants complete control. It wants responsiveness, surrender, and the vehicle, but for a very different reason. It's because the human soul, the animal soul, is egotistical and selfish and will not share with someone else. And so the two souls are demanding the same things, but for very different reasons. The godly soul wants exclusive rights to the body because it's not compatible with unholiness. And the human soul wants complete sovereignty over the body because it is threatened by the holy. Its ego is threatened. Now, what does it mean that the godly soul wants complete control? Complete control begins in the mind. That all understanding, all knowledge, all awareness should be of godly things, of God Himself. And in this awareness, there should be the chachma, the discovery of the idea, the bina, the development of the idea, and the das, the devotion to the idea, the intellectual devotion, mental devotion. From this combination of chachma, bina, and das, the godly soul wants the body to then produce emotions that are godly. A love of God that results from understanding God's closeness. A fear of God that comes from understanding God's infinity and distance. That the heart should be filled to overflowing with feelings of love and fear for God, not leaving any room for any other love or any other fear, meaning any love that is ungodly or any fear that is ungodly. From this love and fear of God that overflows in the right side of the heart into the left side of the heart, the godly soul then wants these emotions expressed and carried out through the three garments that are holy, the garments of Torah. That the body should think words of Torah, words of godliness, ideas of godliness. That the mouth should speak words of Torah, words of godliness. And that the limbs should act on godliness and do the commandments, such as eating the matzah or giving the charity or blowing the shofar or whatever the mitzvah happens to be. Including engaging in the study of Torah itself verbally. Now, in this complete picture of a total godliness, beginning in intellect, which produces the emotions, which then animates or motivates the behavior, the thought, speech, and deed. Here we have a totally harmonious existence that the godly soul demands and needs from the body. When the body is responsive to the godly soul, then you have an exclusive sovereignty that belongs to godliness, where no unholiness may enter, no unholiness may interfere, not even an unholy thought. This would make the godly soul perfectly comfortable. This would make the godly soul perfectly successful in its mission. Of course, the animal soul wants the same things, but in reverse. The animal soul wants the brain to be filled with knowledge, awareness, and devotion to human and tangible realities. They, in turn, will give rise to emotions and excitement, love and fear and compassion, etc., that are also human and also tangible, to love what is tangible, to fear what is tangible. And then this love and fear produces for the animal soul the three garments, thought, speech, and deed of human activity, of human involvement, so that all the thoughts are devoted to what is humanly beneficial, all speech expresses human need, human feelings, human opinion, and that all activity serves the body, serves the human condition rather than the godly condition. The reason for this struggle? Why did God set up a duality, a mixed message within ourselves so that we have two souls struggling against each other? It's in order to allow the human condition to have the choice, to be able to choose between two impulses, between two instincts, between two complete lifestyles, the godly and the human, so that when we choose the godly, it is not an automatic, robotic response, but a human response, one of free choice. The Zohar uses the analogy that a king wanting to test the moral fiber of his son, who will someday be a king, asks a devoted subject, a woman who is very devoted to the king and to the prince. The king asks her to seduce the prince to see exactly what his moral strengths or weaknesses are. Now, this woman will do the job because she's devoted to the king, not because she wants the prince to fail. So the struggle between right and wrong, between holy and unholy, is not a struggle between two independent forces, God forbid. There are no independent forces. God, the king, has a prince, and God, the king, has a subject. And God, the king, asks the subject to test the morality of the prince. So what is the motivation of the animal soul, part of God's creation? What motivates the animal soul? Not merely a desire for pleasure, and not merely a desire for indulgence, but because its purpose, it was given a job by the king, by the creator, to present a counter-argument to the godly soul, to present an alternative to the godly soul, so that the prince or the princess is tested. Now, as the animal soul, as the evil inclination, presents its arguments for sinning and against godliness to the human being, it's not doing so as an anti-godly impulse, but rather as part of the godly plan. The woman tempts the prince because she is devoted to the king. And on the one hand, she has to make the temptation real. She has to be convincing. And on the other hand, she hopes that the prince will not fail, that she fails. And so the animal soul, the tempter, is doing his job out of devotion to the king, not out of rebellion against the king. It's just that it appears that way to us because it has to be convincing. When we make the right choice, when we ignore the distraction, when we don't buy the argument or the apparent truth that the human condition and the godly condition, human needs and godly needs, are equal and present a reasonable choice. You can either do one or the other. You can go the human route or you can go the godly route. You can either be a decent human being or you can be a godly human being. If we don't buy that, because it's not true, they're not equal choices. There's nothing, they have nothing in common. They're not similar at all. So it's not that you have two perfectly legitimate choices and you have to flip a coin and decide which one you want. One is true, the other is apparent. Godliness is true. That is why we exist. That is the purpose of life. That is what it's all about. That's what was and that's what will be. The human is only temporary. It is not a purpose in life. It's merely an activity of life. It is not a purpose for existence. It merely keeps you busy while you're in existence. And therefore, it's not really an option or a choice that you can put on the same scale or opposite the godly. When we don't buy the confusion, when we're not taken in by this apparent truth, and we stick to what is truly true, then we have risen to the challenge. The purpose of creation is realized. Everything is as it should be, and everyone, including our human soul, is content. When we choose the human soul, when we choose to pursue the human approach, then no one is content, because the human soul doesn't have a purpose of its own. The human existence does not justify itself, and we're ignoring the godly. So the godly is not happy, the human is not happy. We are frustrated people. Just as a modern day example, we speak a lot about self-esteem, good self-image. There are times when we think we have a physical problem, but upon closer observation, it turns out to be a psychological problem. There are times we have a psychological problem, but if we look a bit closer, we realize that it is a soul problem. It's not the psychology that is wrong, it's not the psyche, it's not the mind. It's that the soul is not content, because although we have a good life, we don't have a godly life. So that building up our self-image, building up our self-esteem, might very well be compared to taking psychological steroids. It'll make us big and strong, but then we still don't know what to do with all of our strength and with all of our health. So the godly soul is really the only way to go.
We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.